Eulalia had learned to be invisible. She worked at night in the cathedral, restoring marble angels under the amber glow of a lamp, because darkness was the only place where no one stared at the scar devouring her neck. She told herself she preferred the silence of stone to the noise of people. But the truth was she feared the rejection of those who saw her face as a mistake. Tonight, however, invisibility ceased to be an option when an arrogant vampire dragged her from the shadows to mock her in front of the city's elite. He thought he was humiliating a simple restorer. He didn't know that the man in black watching from the darkness didn't see a scar. He saw the only true beauty he had found in 6 centuries. The scaffolding creaked beneath Eulalia's weight as she leaned forward, her brush hovering millimeters from the angel's marble cheek. Dust motes swirled in the amber glow of her work lamp, the only light in the vast cathedral's east wing. She'd timed her arrival for midnight, when the gala would be at its peak 3 halls away, when the city's elite would be too drunk on champagne and their own importance to wander into the restoration zone. The angel's face had been damaged by water seepage, centuries of neglect eating away at the sculptor's original vision. Eulalia had spent weeks mixing the perfect shade of restoration compound, matching it to the original Carrara marble. Her fingers, scarred and paint-stained, moved with practiced precision. The chemical smell of the compound mingled with the cathedral's ancient scent of incense and stone. She hummed softly, an old folk tune her grandmother had taught her. The melody echoed off the vaulted ceiling, swallowed by darkness. Her back ached from the awkward angle, but she was close, so close to finishing. Another hour, and she could slip out the service entrance, collect her modest fee, and disappear back into obscurity where she belonged. The scaffolding swayed slightly. She froze, brush suspended. Footsteps, multiple sets, moving with the confident rhythm of people who owned every space they entered. Eulalia's stomach dropped. She killed her work lamp with a quick twist, plunging herself into shadow. The footsteps grew louder, accompanied now by voices, laughter that rang too sharp against the stone. Through the gaps in the scaffolding, she could see lights spilling from the main hall, silhouettes moving across the archway. "Please keep walking. Please." The footsteps stopped. Well. The voice cut through the darkness like a blade wrapped in silk. "What do we have hiding in the rafters?" Eulalia's grip tightened on her brush. She recognized that voice. Cyprian Mote. She'd seen his photograph in the gala program when she'd been hired, his silver hair and cold smile above a list of philanthropic achievements that read like a resume for sainthood. The reality of him felt different, though. Colder. The air itself seemed to contract around his presence. "I believe," Mote continued, his footsteps approaching the scaffolding's base, "that the restoration work was meant to be completed before tonight's event, not during." "I'm almost finished," Eulalia called down, hating the tremor in her voice. "I'll be gone within the hour. You won't even know I was here. But we do know you're here." Another voice, female, edged with amusement. "And Cyprian's right. It's rather awkward, isn't it? Having the help visible during such an important gathering." The help. Eulalia's jaw clenched. She'd heard worse. Been called worse. The scar that ran from her left temple to her jawline ensured she'd always be something people noticed, categorized, dismissed. "Come down," Mote said. It wasn't a request. Eulalia descended slowly, each rung of the scaffolding ladder protesting under her weight. Her work clothes, paint-splattered jeans, and an old flannel shirt felt suddenly obscene against the cathedral's grandeur. When her feet touched the marble floor, she found herself surrounded. Mote stood at the center of a small crowd, all evening wear and expensive perfume. His eyes, she noticed, were an unusual shade of amber, almost luminescent in the dim light. They fixed on her face, specifically on her scar, with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "Fascinating," he murmured, stepping closer. "Such damage. Were you in an accident?" The question landed like a slap. Behind Mote, a woman in a silver gown tittered. "I don't see how that's relevant," Eulalia said, forcing steel in her voice. "I was hired to restore the statue. That's what I'm doing. At midnight, in the dark, like some sort of church mouse." Moat circled her slowly, and Eulalia fought the urge to turn with him, to keep him in her sight. Tell me, do you always skulk about, or is this special treatment for us? Heat flooded Eulalia's face. I work when I'm least likely to disturb anyone. I was told the gala would be in the West Wing, and yet here you are, disturbing us anyway. The crowd had grown. More figures emerged from the main hall, drawn by the spectacle. Eulalia recognized the pattern. She'd seen it before in a dozen different contexts. The way people gathered when they sensed weakness, when they smelled blood in the water. Her fingers curled into fists at her sides. I apologize for the inconvenience, she said, each word carefully measured. If you'll excuse me, I'll pack my equipment and leave. Oh, I don't think so. Moat's hand shot out, catching her wrist. His grip was cold, unnaturally so, like marble that had never seen sun. You've interrupted our evening. The least you can do is explain yourself properly. Tell us, what makes you think you're qualified to touch a 15th century masterpiece? What credentials could someone like you possibly possess? Someone like you. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Eulalia tried to pull away, but Moat's grip tightened. I studied at the Accademia in Florence. I worked on pieces in the Vatican archives. My credentials are they? Moat's smile widened. Because for where I'm standing, you look like someone who couldn't get legitimate work, so you take whatever scraps you can find. Night shifts, hidden projects, the jobs no respectable restorer would accept. The crowd pressed closer. Eulalia could smell their perfume, their wine-soaked breath, the underlying scent of something else. Something metallic and old. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Let go of me. Make me. The words were barely out of his mouth when the temperature dropped. Not gradually, but all at once, as if someone had opened a door to winter. Eulalia's breath misted in the air. The crowd fell silent. A figure emerged from the shadows beyond the archway, and Eulalia's first thought was that shadows themselves had learned to walk. He was tall, dressed in black that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Dark hair fell across a face that could have been carved by the same hand that had created the angel above them. All sharp angles and impossible beauty. But it was his eyes that stopped her breath. Dark as midnight, fixed on Moat with an expression that made the vampire council leader's grip on her wrist falter. Cyprian. The newcomer's voice was soft, almost gentle. It made the threat in it all the more terrifying. Release her. Moat's hand dropped from Eulalia's wrist, as if burned. The crowd scattered like starlings, their expensive shoes clicking against marble in their haste to retreat. Within seconds, only 3 remained: Eulalia, Moat, and the man in black. Thelonious, Moat said, and Eulalia heard something new in his voice. Fear carefully masked. I know what you were doing. Thelonious Strauss moved forward, each step deliberate, measured. He stopped beside Eulalia, close enough that she could feel the cold radiating from him. Not the cold of death, but something else. Something ancient and powerful and utterly inhuman. You were entertaining yourself at the expense of someone under my protection. I didn't realize. You never do. Thelonious turned to Eulalia, and she found herself unable to look away from those dark eyes. Are you hurt? She shook her head, not trusting her voice. His gaze dropped to her wrist, where Moat's fingers had left red marks against her pale skin. Something flickered across his face, there and gone too quickly to name. When he looked back at Moat, the temperature dropped another degree. Leave. All of you. The gala is over. The words echoed through the cathedral, carrying a weight that made the ancient stones seem to shiver. Moat opened his mouth, closed it, then turned and fled. The sound of retreating footsteps faded into silence. Eulalia stood frozen, acutely aware that she was now alone with something that wasn't human, had never been human, and was looking at her like she was the answer to a question he'd been asking for centuries. You were singing, Thelonious said softly. Earlier, I heard you. Before she could respond, he moved. One moment he was standing beside her, the next his arms were around her, lifting her as if she weighed nothing. The world tilted, and then they were moving out of the cathedral into the night, leaving her equipment and her carefully constructed invisibility behind. The night air hit her face like a slap of ice water, shocking her system into awareness. Thelonious moved through the darkness with inhuman speed, his arms a cage of iron around her ribs, and Eulalia's mind struggled to catch up with her body. The cathedral's Gothic spires blurred past, then the street, then nothing but shadow and the whisper of wind that shouldn't exist at this velocity. She wanted to scream, wanted to fight, but her voice had locked itself somewhere deep in her throat, and her hands, those scarred, ugly hands, could only clutch at the fabric of his coat as the world became a smear of black and amber streetlights. When they stopped, it was so sudden that her stomach lurched. Solid ground materialized beneath her feet, though Thelonious kept one hand at the small of her back, steadying her. Eulalia blinked, trying to force her vision to cooperate. A mansion? No, that word was too small. An estate rose before them, all pale stone and wrought iron, the kind of place that belonged in period dramas about doomed aristocrats. Gas lamps flickered along a curved driveway, casting pools of golden light that did nothing to soften the building's austere beauty. Ivy climbed the eastern wall, its leaves rustling in a breeze that smelled of old roses and something else. Something metallic and faintly sweet. Where? Her voice came out as gravel. She swallowed, tried again. Where are we? Home. Thelonious released her, but didn't step away. His dark eyes studied her face with an intensity that made her skin prickle. You're safe here. Safe. The word tasted wrong in her mouth, like wine that had turned. Eulalia wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware that she was still wearing her work clothes, the plain black pants and shapeless sweater that had made her invisible at the gala. Her mask was gone, lost somewhere between the cathedral and this place. The scars on her neck felt exposed, raw, as if Moat's fingers had peeled away more than just fabric. I need to go back. The words came automatically, a lifeline to normalcy. My equipment. The painting. I have to. It's being taken care of. You don't understand. That's a 15th century altarpiece. The pigments are unstable. If someone moves it wrong. Eulalia, her name in his mouth was different than it had been in Moat's. Softer, almost reverent. Look at me. She didn't want to. Looking at him meant acknowledging what he'd done. The way he'd moved through the cathedral like death itself, scattering vampires with nothing but his presence. The way he'd picked her up as if she were made of paper and air. But her eyes betrayed her, lifting to meet his gaze. You were hurt, Thelonious said quietly. That matters more than any painting. The gentleness in his voice made something crack in her chest. Eulalia felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes and hated herself for it. She'd survived the fire, survived the surgeries and the pitying looks and the slow death of her career. She didn't cry anymore. Crying was a luxury for people who still believed the world might be kind. I am fine, she lied. His expression shifted, something almost like pain flickering across those perfect features. Come inside, please. The please did it. That small word, offered like a gift, like he was asking permission instead of simply taking what he wanted. Eulalia found herself nodding, her feet carrying her up the stone steps before her mind could form a proper objection. The entrance hall swallowed her whole. Marble floors stretched in every direction, veined with gold that caught the light from a chandelier 3 stories above. A grand staircase curved upward, its banister carved from dark wood that gleamed like wet ink. Paintings lined the walls. Real paintings, not reproductions. In Eulalia's professional eye caught the signature brushwork of masters she'd only seen in textbooks. A Caravaggio, a Vermeer, a portrait by someone who'd learned from Da Vinci himself, if the sfumato technique was any indication. You collect art, she said stupidly. I collect beautiful things. Thelonious moved past her, shrugging out of his coat with fluid grace. Beneath it, his shirt was white silk, tailored to emphasize the lean strength of his frame. And I preserve them, like you do. The comparison made her uncomfortable. She wasn't beautiful. Hadn't been, even before the fire. Plain Eulalia Yarrow, with her mousy brown hair and her too wide mouth and her hands that were better suited to labor than elegance. The fire had just made the truth more obvious. A woman appeared from a doorway to the left, her footsteps silent on the marble. She was older, maybe 60, with silver hair pulled into a severe bun and eyes that assessed Eulalia with the efficiency of a general surveying a battlefield. Human, Eulalia thought. Definitely human. The warmth of her presence was too real, too grounded. "Mrs. Calloway," Thelonious said, "please prepare the blue room. And have something sent up. Tea, I think. And food." "Of course, sir." Mrs. Calloway's gaze lingered on Eulalia for a moment longer, something unreadable in her expression, before she disappeared back through the doorway. "You have human staff." Eulalia hadn't meant it as a question, but it came out that way. "I have people who choose to work for me." Thelonious gestured toward the staircase. "Gulme, you should rest." Rest. As if she could rest in this place, with him, knowing what he was. But her legs were shaking, adrenaline finally giving way to exhaustion, and the thought of collapsing in the middle of this pristine marble hall was worse than following him upstairs. The blue room was aptly named. Midnight blue walls, silver accents, a four-poster bed draped in fabric that looked like captured moonlight. A fire burned in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across Persian rugs that probably cost more than Eulalia made in a year. French doors opened onto a balcony, though the curtains were drawn against the night. "The bathroom is through there." Thelonious indicated a door to the right. "You'll find everything you need. Mrs. Calloway will bring clothes in the morning." "I'm not staying." The protest was automatic, hollow. He paused in the doorway, his back to her. The line of his shoulders was tense, as if he were holding something back with physical effort. "You're free to leave whenever you wish. But it's 3 in the morning, and you've had a shock. At least rest until dawn." Then he was gone, the door clicking shut with a softness that was somehow worse than a slam. Eulalia stood in the center of the room, her heart hammering against her ribs. The silence pressed in from all sides, broken only by the crackle of the fire. She should leave, should walk out that door and down those stairs, and keep walking until she found a cab or a bus or anything that would take her back to her tiny apartment and her normal life. But her feet wouldn't move. Instead, she found herself drifting toward the bathroom. It was all white marble and gold fixtures, a clawfoot tub deep enough to drown in. She caught sight of herself in the mirror and flinched. Her scars looked worse in this light. The burned tissue that crawled up the left side of her neck, disappearing into her hairline, was livid against her pale skin. The marks from Moat's fingers stood out on her wrist like accusations. She looked small, damaged, exactly what she was. Eulalia turned away from the mirror and stripped off her clothes with mechanical efficiency. The shower was hot enough to hurt, steam filling the bathroom until she couldn't see her reflection anymore. She stood under the spray until her skin turned pink, scrubbing at the places Moat had touched as if she could wash away the memory of his cold fingers and colder smile. When she finally emerged, wrapped in a towel that was softer than anything she owned, she found a tray waiting on the small table by the fire. Tea in a delicate china cup, sandwiches cut into precise triangles, fruit that looked too perfect to be real. She ate mechanically, tasting nothing, and crawled into the bed. The sheets smelled like lavender and something else, something that reminded her of Thelonious. Old books and winter nights and the space between heartbeats. Sleep took her under like a wave. She woke to sunlight streaming through gaps in the curtains and the smell of coffee. For one disoriented moment, Eulalia thought she was back in her apartment, that the gala and Moat and Thelonious had all been some fever dream brought on by too much work and too little sleep. Then she saw the blue walls and remembered. A knock at the door made her sit up, clutching the sheets to her chest. Yes. Mrs. Calloway entered, carrying a tray and a garment bag. "Good morning, Miss Yarrow. I brought breakfast and some clothes. Mr. Strauss thought you might be more comfortable in something fresh." "Thank you." Eulalia's voice was rough with sleep. Is Mr. Strauss awake?" Something flickered across Mrs. Calloway's face. Amusement, maybe, or pity. "Mr. Strauss doesn't sleep during the day, miss. He's in his study. He asked that you join him when you're ready." The woman set down the tray and hung the garment bag on the back of the bathroom door, then left with the same silent efficiency she displayed the night before. Eulalia forced herself out of bed and unzipped the garment bag. Inside was a dress. Simple, elegant, the color of charcoal. It fit perfectly, skimming her frame without clinging, the neckline high enough to cover her scars. Whoever had chosen it understood her need for armor. The breakfast was eggs and toast and fruit, all of it fresh and perfectly prepared. She ate because her body demanded it, not because she tasted anything. When she could delay no longer, Eulalia left the blue room and descended the grand staircase. The house was different in daylight. Still beautiful, still overwhelming, but less otherworldly. She could hear sounds now. The distant clatter of dishes, the murmur of voices, the hum of a vacuum somewhere on an upper floor. Life, continuing in the spaces between the art and the marble. Mrs. Calloway appeared at the base of the stairs, as if summoned by thought. "This way, miss." The study was on the first floor, down a corridor lined with more paintings. Mrs. Calloway knocked once, then opened the door without waiting for a response. Thelonious stood by the window, his back to the door. The curtains were heavy velvet, drawn against the sun, but enough light seeped through to illuminate the room. Books lined every wall, floor to ceiling, the kind of collection that took centuries to build. A desk dominated the center of the space, its surface covered with papers and what looked like architectural drawings. "Thank you, Mrs. Calloway." He didn't turn around. The door closed, leaving Eulalia alone with him. The silence stretched, taut as a wire. "How are you feeling?" Thelonious asked finally. Confused. The honesty surprised her. "I don't understand why I'm here." "Because Cyprian Moat put his hands on you." Now he turned, and the expression on his face made her breath catch. Fury, carefully controlled, burning behind those dark eyes. "Because he frightened you. Because I couldn't let that stand. You barely know me." "I know enough." He moved toward her, slow and deliberate, giving her time to retreat if she wanted. She didn't. "I know you restore broken things. I know you hide in shadows because the world taught you that being seen is dangerous. I know you sing when you think no one's listening, and your voice is the most beautiful thing I've heard in 600 years." The words hit her like physical blows. Eulalia shook her head, backing up a step. "You're romanticizing. I'm nobody. I fix paintings for people who don't even look at me." "You're wrong." Thelonious stopped, maintaining the distance between them. "You're extraordinary, and Moat knew it. That's why he targeted you." "What do you mean?" "The council has been trying to undermine my authority for decades. Moat especially. He knew you were under my protection, and he chose to humiliate you anyway, to prove that my word means nothing." His hands clenched into fists at his sides. He was wrong. Protection. The word echoed in her mind, strange and heavy. "Why would you protect me? We met once. Months ago. You hired me to restore a painting. I hired you because your work is exceptional. I protected you because..." He trailed off, something like uncertainty crossing his face. It looked wrong there, too human. "Because when I met you, something changed. I can't explain it better than that." Eulalia's heart was hammering again, that same panicked rhythm from the night before. This was insane. All of it. She should leave. Should run as far and as fast as she could from this beautiful monster and his beautiful house and his words that wrapped around her like silk chains. But she didn't move. "What happened to me?" The question came out smaller than she'd intended. "Last night, you moved so fast. We were at the cathedral, and then we were here, and I don't remember." "I'm sorry." Genuine regret colored his voice. "I should have asked permission. But you were in shock, and I needed to get you somewhere safe. Somewhere Moat couldn't follow." "Can he?" "Follow, I mean. Not here. This house is warded. Old magic. Older than the council. Older than most vampires walking the earth. You're safe within these walls." "Safe." That word again. Eulalia wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warmth of the room. "And outside them?" Thelonious's expression darkened. "Outside, you're vulnerable. Moat won't forget what happened. He'll see you as a weakness. A way to get to me. That I need to leave the city. Go somewhere he can't find me. He'll find you. The certainty in his voice was absolute. The council has resources, connections. If they want to locate someone, they will. So what are you saying? That I'm trapped here. Panic was rising in her chest, making it hard to breathe. That I'm a prisoner? No. He closed the distance between them in 2 strides, his hands coming up to frame her face with a gentleness that contradicted everything she knew about what he was. Never prisoner. But I'm asking you to stay. Let me keep you safe until I can neutralize the threat. His touch was cool against her flushed skin. Eulalia should pull away, should put distance between herself and this creature who'd killed people, who'd lived for centuries on blood and death. But his eyes held hers, and she saw something in them that looked like desperation. How long? She whispered. I don't know. Weeks, maybe. I'm working on something. A way to change the council's power structure. If I succeed, Moat won't be able to touch you. And if you fail, his thumb traced the line of her jaw, careful to avoid the scarred tissue on her neck. I won't. The certainty should have been arrogant. Instead, it felt like a promise. Eulalia closed her eyes, trying to think through the fog of exhaustion and fear and something else she didn't want to name. I have a life, a job. People will notice if I disappear. I've already contacted your employer, told them you're taking emergency leave to care for a sick relative. Your rent is paid through the end of the year. Your apartment is being watched to make sure no one disturbs it. He paused. I took liberties. I'm sorry, but I needed to make sure you had the option to stay without consequences. She should be angry, should rage at him for making decisions about her life without asking. But all she felt was a strange, numb relief. Someone else was taking care of things. Someone else was making the choices. For the first time since the fire, Eulalia didn't have to be strong. Okay, she heard herself say. I'll stay. For now. The tension drained from Thelonious' shoulders. He pressed his forehead to hers, a gesture so intimate that it stole her breath. Thank you. They stood like that for a long moment, breathing the same air, before he stepped back and the distance returned. The days that followed developed their own rhythm. Eulalia spent her mornings exploring the mansion, cataloging the artwork with a professional's eye. The collection was staggering, pieces that museums would kill for, hanging casually in hallways and bedrooms. Thelonious gave her free rein, seeming pleased by her interest. The afternoons were hers. She read in the library, losing herself in first editions and manuscripts that should have been in climate-control vaults. Mrs. Calloway brought her lunch and tea, always with a small smile that suggested she approved of something. The evenings belonged to Thelonious. He would emerge from wherever he spent his days. She never asked, and he never volunteered, and find her in the library or the conservatory or the music room. They would talk about art, about history, about the strange overlap between the two. He told her stories about the paintings in his collection, about watching artists work, about the night he'd stood in the Sistine Chapel while Michelangelo cursed at the ceiling. She told him about the fire, about waking up in the hospital to find half her neck destroyed and her career in ashes, about the slow, painful process of rebuilding herself into something functional, if not whole. He listened like every word mattered, like she mattered. It was dangerous, this growing comfort. Eulalia knew it, felt it in the way her heart jumped when she heard his footsteps, in the way she found herself dressing more carefully for their evening conversations. She was falling into something that couldn't end well, but she couldn't seem to stop. On the 5th night, Thelonious took her to his private gallery. It was in the east wing, behind a door she'd assumed was locked. Inside, the walls were covered with paintings that made her professional composure crack. These are... She couldn't finish the sentence. Mine. He moved through the space with obvious pride. Not collected. Created. Eulalia stared at a canvas that could have been a Rembrandt, if Rembrandt had painted in the 21st century. The technique was flawless, the use of light and shadow masterful. You painted these? I had time to learn. A hint of amusement colored his voice. 600 years provides ample opportunity for practice. She moved from painting to painting, her trained eye catching the evolution of style, the way he'd absorbed and adapted techniques across centuries. There were pieces that echoed the Italian Renaissance, others that spoke to Baroque drama, a few that ventured into Impressionism's loose brushwork. And then she saw it. A portrait, recent, based on the canvas and the paint. A woman with brown hair and wide eyes and scars that crawled up the left side of her neck. Eulalia's breath stopped. "When did you paint this?" Her voice was barely a whisper. Thelonious came to stand beside her, his gaze fixed on the portrait. "3 months ago, after you left my house the first time, I couldn't stop thinking about you. About the way you looked at that damaged altarpiece like it was the most important thing in the world. About your hands, so careful and sure. About the way you tried to hide your scars, as if they made you less instead of more. More what? Beautiful, real, alive." He turned to face her, and the intensity in his eyes made her knees weak. "I've existed for 6 centuries, Eulalia. I've seen empires rise and fall. I've watched humanity create and destroy and create again. And in all that time, I've never met anyone who made me feel the way you do." "What way?" She needed to hear him say it. "Human." The word hung between them, fragile and impossibly heavy. Eulalia's hands were shaking. She clasped them together, trying to steady herself, but it was useless. Everything was shaking. Her hands, her heart, the foundations of the careful life she'd built from the ashes of the old one. "I should go," she said, but she didn't move. "Should you?" Thelonious reached out, his fingers hovering just above her scarred neck. Not touching, but close enough that she could feel the cold radiating from his skin. "Or, do you want to stay?" She wanted to stay. God help her. She wanted to stay in this moment forever, suspended between fear and desire, between the safety of her old life and the terrifying promise of something new. But before she could answer, a sound shattered the moment. Shattering glass. Shouts. The distant wail of an alarm. Thelonious's expression went from tender to lethal in a heartbeat. "Stay here." "What's happening?" "The wards." He was already moving toward the door. "Someone's breaking through the wards." Then he was gone, moving with that inhuman speed, and Eulalia was alone in the gallery with her painted face staring back at her from the canvas. The sounds of violence grew louder. Crashes. Screams. The wet sound of something tearing. Eulalia's instinct screamed at her to hide, to find a closet or a cabinet and make herself small and invisible the way she'd learned to do. But her feet carried her toward the door instead, toward the danger, toward Thelonious. The hallway was chaos. Vampires, she could tell by the way they moved, by the cold that preceded them, were pouring through a shattered window. Mrs. Calloway was there, her silver hair wild, wielding what looked like a blessed blade. 2 other humans Eulalia had never seen fought beside her, their movements trained and efficient. And in the center of it all was Thelonious, a blur of lethal grace, destroying anything that came near him. Eulalia pressed herself against the wall, trying to stay out of the way. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was real. This was happening. The violence she'd only glimpsed at the gala was here, in this house, shattering the illusion of safety. Then she saw him, Cyprian Mote, stepping through the broken window with a smile that promised pain. His eyes found her immediately, and the smile widened. "There you are," he said, his voice cutting through the chaos. "The little songbird. I've been looking for you." Thelonious turned, and the sound that came from his throat wasn't human. It was rage-given voice, ancient and terrible. "You dare. I dare everything." Mote's gaze never left Eulalia, especially when the prize is so interesting. "Tell me, Strauss, does she know? Does she know what you're really keeping her for? Get out." The words were barely recognizable, ground out through a jaw that looked like it was fighting not to transform into something monstrous. "Does she know about the cure?" Mote's voice rose, carrying to every corner of the hallway. "About the research? About why you really need her alive? Cure." The word dropped into Eulalia's mind like a stone into still water, sending ripples of confusion outward. What is he talking about? She heard herself ask the question, though her voice sounded like it was coming from very far away. Thelonious's expression cracked, just for a moment. Guilt, raw and unmistakable. And Eulalia knew. She didn't know the details, didn't understand the how or the why. But she knew, with the certainty of prey recognizing a predator's true intentions, that Moat was telling the truth. Eulalia, Thelonious started. She ran down the hallway, away from the fighting, away from Moat's triumphant laughter and Thelonious's desperate voice calling her name. Her feet slapped against marble, then carpet, then marble again. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to get away, had to get out, had to. A hand closed around her wrist, yanking her backward. Eulalia screamed, but the sound died as she was spun around and pressed against a wall. Cyprian Moat smiled down at her, his eyes glittering with malice and satisfaction. "Now then," he said softly, "let's have a proper conversation, shall we? About what you really are to our dear vampire king." The wall was cold against her back, but Moat's hand on her wrist burned like a brand. His grip was iron, his smile all teeth and cruelty. "You're going to tell me everything," he said, leaning closer. His breath smelled of old wine and older blood. "What makes you so special? What did Strauss find in your veins that—" The words cut off as Thelonious materialized behind him, moving with a speed that made the air crack. He seized Moat by the throat and hurled him down the corridor. The older vampire crashed through a decorative table, sending porcelain and wood exploding across the marble. "Run," Thelonious said to Eulalia, not looking at her. His voice was barely human. "Find the East Wing. Lock yourself." "No." The word came out stronger than she'd intended. Her wrist throbbed where Moat had grabbed her, but she didn't move. "No more running." Thelonious turned to her then, and the anguish in his face nearly broke her resolve. "You don't understand what you are to him. What he'll do. Then tell me." She stepped forward, even as Moat was rising from the wreckage, brushing splinters from his jacket with deliberate slowness. "Tell me about the cure. Tell me what I really am." The silence stretched between them, thick with centuries of secrets. Down the hall, other vampires were gathering, drawn by the commotion. She could feel their eyes, their hunger, their curiosity pressing against her skin like cold fingers. "Your blood," Thelonious said finally, each word seeming to cost him. "The fire that scarred you, it changed something. Made you toxic to us. Fatal, if consumed in quantity. But in trace amounts." He swallowed, and she saw the muscle in his jaw work. "It could cure the bloodlust and the need to kill." The words settled into her chest like stones. "So, I'm medicine. A resource." "No." He reached for her, then stopped himself, his hand falling. "You were never just that. Not to me." "How touching," Moat said, straightening his cuffs. Blood trickled from his temple, already healing. "But you've told her only half the truth, Strauss. Shall I share the rest?" Thelonious moved in front of Eulalia, a wall of coiled violence. "Touch her again, and I'll tear you apart." "You can't." Moat's smile widened. "Council law. Strike me, and you forfeit your crown, your territory, everything. And then who protects your precious cure?" The gathered vampires murmured, a sound like wind through dead leaves. Eulalia could feel the weight of their attention, the ancient laws binding them all in invisible chains. "But perhaps," Moat continued, circling slowly, "we can come to an arrangement. The girl, in exchange for your continued reign. Think of it. No war, no bloodshed. Just one small sacrifice." "Never." The word came from Thelonious like a growl, and the lights flickered. Power radiated from him in waves that made Eulalia's teeth ache. Moat laughed. "Then you condemn your kind to eternal hunger. How noble. How utterly selfish." He turned to the assembled vampires. "You see, your king would let you all starve rather than—" "I'll go with you." Eulalia's voice cut through the tension like a blade. Every eye turned to her. She stepped around Thelonious, ignoring his sharp intake of breath, his hand reaching to stop her. "I'll go," she repeated, meeting Moat's gaze. "But not as a prisoner, as a negotiator. You want my blood? Then we discuss terms. All of us. In the open." Moat's eyes narrowed. "You think you have any power here?" "I think," Eulalia said, and her voice didn't shake, "that I'm the only person in this hallway who can walk away. That gives me all the power." For a moment, no one moved. Then Moat threw back his head and laughed, the sound echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "Brave little mortal. Very well. Let's talk." He gestured toward the main hall. "After you." Eulalia started walking, her heart hammering against her ribs. Behind her, she heard Thelonious follow, his presence a dark flame at her back. The other vampires parted like water, their faces pale masks of hunger and curiosity. The main hall was vast, all soaring columns and stained glass that filtered moonlight into pools of color on the floor. Moat positioned himself at the center, arms spread wide. "Speak then," he said. "Tell us all why we should let you dictate terms." Eulalia's mind raced. She thought of her scars, of the fire that had marked her, of every pitying look and whispered comment she'd endured. The ugliness they'd all seen as weakness. Because, she said slowly, "You're all looking at this wrong. You see me as a cure, a solution. But I'm not medicine you can bottle and control." She reached up, fingers finding the raised tissue along her jaw. "This fire? It didn't just scar me. It made me holy, made my blood poison to the profane." Moat's smile faltered. "What are you? You want to know what I am?" Eulalia pulled the small knife from her pocket, the one she used for delicate restoration work. Its blade caught the light. "Let me show you." Eulalia, no. Thelonious started forward, but she was already moving. She drew the blade across her palm, quick and clean. Blood welled up, dark and glistening. The scent of it filled the hall, but underneath the copper, something else. Something that made every vampire in the room recoil. Smoke. Incense. The ghost of flames that had burned in a church. "Come on then," Eulalia said, holding her bleeding hand toward Moat. "Take what you want. Drink your cure." Moat stared at the blood, and for the first time, she saw uncertainty flicker across his face. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" She stepped closer. "You said it yourself, I'm toxic. Fatal in quantity. But you don't know the threshold, do you? Don't know how much it takes. Could be a pint. Could be a single drop." The silence was absolute. Even the other vampires had gone still, watching. "So drink," Eulalia whispered. "Cure yourself. Or admit that you're just as afraid as the rest of them." Moat's hand shot out, faster than thought, gripping her wrist. He pulled her bleeding palm toward his mouth and stopped. His fingers trembled. The ancient vampire, who had lived through centuries, who had faced down armies and rivals and death itself, stood frozen by the blood of one scarred woman. "You can you?" Eulalia said softly. "Because you know, deep down, you know what this blood will do." Silence. Thelonious's voice cut through the hall like a blade, and it wasn't just sound, it was power, ancient and absolute. The voice of command that only vampire kings possessed. Every creature in the room froze, compelled by magic older than nations. He moved to Eulalia's side, and when he spoke again, his words resonated with centuries of authority. "You look at dust when a masterpiece stands before you." Moat's grip on Eulalia's wrist loosened. His face had gone pale, his eyes wide. "She is not a cure to be harvested," Thelonious continued, and the air itself seemed to bend around his words. "She is not a resource to be controlled. She's my equal, my choice, and I will burn this world to ash before I let you touch her again." The magical pressure in the room built until Eulalia's ears popped. Moat stumbled backward, releasing her completely. His mouth worked, but no sound came out. The command still held him silent. "You want to challenge me?" Thelonious asked, and his eyes had gone completely black. "Then do it properly. Single combat. Or walk away and never return to my territory." For a long moment, Moat stood there, rage and fear warring across his features. Then, slowly, he straightened his jacket and turned toward the door. "This isn't over," he managed to say, the command finally releasing him. "The council will hear of this. Let them." Thelonious didn't move, but his presence filled the hall like a storm. "I'll tell them myself. Tell them I found something more valuable than power, more precious than immortality." Moat left, his footsteps echoing. The other vampires followed, melting into shadows until only Eulalia and Thelonious remained in the vast, empty hall. Eulalia looked down at her bleeding palm. The cut was already clotting, the blood drying to rust. Her hand shook now that the adrenaline was fading. Let me see. Thelonious's voice was gentle again, human. He took her hand carefully, examining the wound. You could have died if he'd called your bluff. It wasn't a bluff. She met his eyes. I knew he wouldn't drink, because I finally understood. The scars aren't what make me toxic. The fear is, the shame, all the poison I've carried inside myself for years. She laughed, and it came out watery. I'm not medicine. I'm just me, scarred and strange and completely ordinary. No. Thelonious pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and wrapped it around her palm with infinite care. You're extraordinary. You faced down a vampire 3 times your age with nothing but conviction and a blade. He tied off the makeshift bandage. You saved me. Save us both. You saved me first, Eulalia said. When you looked at me and saw something other than damage. I saw truth. He cupped her scarred cheek, thumb tracing the raised tissue with reverence. I saw beauty that goes deeper than skin, strength that fire couldn't burn away. She leaned into his touch, feeling the coolness of his palm against her flushed skin. Outside, dawn was approaching. She could feel it in the way the darkness seemed to hold its breath. What happens now, she asked. Now. Thelonious smiled, and it was real, reaching his eyes for the first time since she'd met him. Now we figured out. Together. As equals. Even though I'm mortal, even though I can't give you a cure, especially because of that. He pressed his forehead to hers, and she felt his breath, unnecessary but given anyway, ghost across her lips. I don't want to cure what I am. I just want to choose who I am. And I choose this. Choose you. The first rays of sunlight broke through the stained glass, painting them both in colors, crimson and gold, violet and green. Eulalia closed her eyes and felt the warmth on her scars, the cool press of Thelonious against her, the steady rhythm of her own mortal heart. In the end, she thought, maybe that was enough. Maybe that was everything. The light grew stronger, and they stood together in it, casting shadows that intertwined on the ancient floor, proof that even darkness could find its place beside the dawn.